Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Strategic Farming Let's Talk Crops program. We are really happy to have you join us today. This is the inaugural program for the 2026 Let's Talk Crops season, so we're very pleased to have you here with us today. Today's topic is going to be all about soil compaction, how it forms, um, and how to avoid it, and then what to do if you do have soil compaction, how to remedy it as well. These sessions are brought to you by University of Minnesota Extension and generous support from the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council and the Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council. My name is Angie Peltier, and I work as a regional crops educator out of the Northwest Research and Outreach Center in Crookston, Minnesota. We welcome today Jodi DeJong-Hughes, my colleague. She works in soils and tillage systems under the Water Resources Center at the University of Minnesota. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. These sessions are meant to be relatively informal, a little bit of discussion towards the end of the program. We'll have about 40 to 50 minutes of information presented by Jodi today on this general topic, and then we'll open things up for questions. We did also receive some questions before, while people were registering. There was an opportunity for folks to submit questions, so we'll get through some of those today as well. With that, I will turn it over to our speaker today. Her name is Jodi DeJong-Hughes. She's worked for University of Minnesota Extension for 29 years, and I'm very pleased to have Jodi present to us here today. Jodi, please go ahead and unmute and share your screen.
Okay. So, yes, I'm Jodi DeJong-Hughes. I'm out of the Wilmer office in West Central Minnesota and cover kind of the western part of Minnesota, and work a lot with farmers on their tillage methods and also how to help kind of decrease compaction in the field. So it is very quick to cause, and it is slow to remedy. So let's get started. I will not be looking at the Q&A. We'll look at that at the end because otherwise I just get distracted and it's like a squirrel with a puppy, you know. Every spring I go up in the airplane and we look at fields and I take photos, and most years this is what I see in quite a few fields. It's very rare to find a field that is absolutely green consistently across it, either for drainage reasons or also for tire track reasons. So this one here is either the combine or doing the tillage at an angle. A lot of people like to combine at an angle, but your combine is one of the heaviest pieces of equipment that you have in the field, and it can cause a lot of compaction. Here's another one. If you look at the lighter colors, that's going to be more topography and Mother Nature where it's drowned out or it's also burning up. But any of the lines in there, straight lines, those are going to be man-made. Another one, and another one. This one I like because what it shows is where the light green is actually a low-lying area. And you can see that compaction or the wheel tracks are really showing up where it's a little bit wetter in the field. Whereas where the darker green is, that's where it has better soil moisture, not too wet, the Goldilocks type thing, not too wet, not too dry. And you have a lot less compaction due to that. So today we're going to kind of talk about what is compaction and so what? What does it do? Why do we care if it's out there? And now what? What are we going to do once we figure out we have it? So what is soil compaction? Soil compaction is basically a reduction in pore space. You just lose those pores in your soil, and that can be very detrimental, and we'll talk why. Now, this is a picture that I took when I was at a Nebraska field day, and the photo on the left is showing a soil that is compacted and has a lot of conventional tillage, so deeper tillage multiple times, kind of aggressive. And the one on the right is a long-term no-till field, and it's at the same depth that they took it. So they hit the subsoil, and so they could figure out how much above it. So when people go into these soil health practices, they say, I built soil. And it's like, no, you didn't build soil. What you did is you built porosity. You got more air into the soil. And so this is a good representation of how much air can help your soil, when you reduce your tillage. Again, here's another photo of it, or image of it. If you look at soil compaction, the one on the left is kind of ideal. That's what we would like to have. We would like to have our soil be 50% sand, silt, and clay, and then 50% be in pore space. And half of that pore space would hold water, and half of it would hold air. That's ideal for root growth, for our microbes, nutrient movement, things like that. The one on the right is a compacted soil. So you can't squish out water. What you're doing is you are decreasing your air in the soil. And with your leguminous plants like soybeans and the clovers and quite a few of the cover crops, they have rhizobium. And rhizobium is a bacteria, and it needs oxygen. So sometimes go look at your soybean plants, and if they're not nodulating very far down into the soil, it could mean that you have an oxygen problem or a compaction problem. The other thing here too is you can see that the soil is going to be wetter, and in the spring that's not always the best thing, and it's also going to remain cooler and wetter longer because air warms up almost 10,000 times faster than water. So we do have a myth about compaction, and that's, our freeze thaw takes care of it. It's no problem. Well, what you need with freeze thaw is multiple freeze thaw cycles. And I'm talking 10 to 12 freeze thaw cycles in one season. And compaction can go 2, even 4 feet deep. And so we don't always get, we may get one freeze thaw at those steps, or we sometimes don't even freeze down to that. So the truth is that only the top few inches, you get the freeze thaw, freeze thaw, freeze thaw. That helps out there to break things down. And again, depends on our snowfall and snow cover. And the other ones are anything deeper doesn't really work. What does work is the wetting and drying. So you see this here, this is a crack. This is a Crookston soil. And when the soil cracks open, when it dries up and you have the clays in there, the soil kind of falls down into it. And then when it gets wet, it seals back up. And this is kind of a good representation of that going on. So freeze thaw can help a little bit on the surface, but wetting and drying really help deeper into the soil profile. So, and what is it that does that? It's the clay minerals. They're a certain type. And if you ever see a description of your soil from an NRCS book, it will say smectitic or smectite soil. If it has that, then But you know what an easier way is? You go out to your field in the middle of summer, and if it's cracked open, then you have those kind of clays. You don't need to go look it up. So what's the problem? What does it affect? And I love this picture because in the front ground, that is soybeans. And in the back one, it is the wheat. And so you can see wheel traffic in both of those fields. And, it can really damage your yield. It can also affect your corn emergence. So this is a study that was done over in Wisconsin, and they used the dark gray line as less than 5 ton an axle load was out there. Then the yellow one is the 9 ton an axle load, and the maroon one is 14 ton an axle load. So what this is showing is the one means full emergence, 100% emergence, and these would be percentages going down here. So when you have very little compaction out there, or very little weight, within 21 days after planting, you have almost 100%, well, about 90% emergence from the one that has very little compaction. The one with a little bit more, you only have 40% emerged on the same day. And for a 9 ton an axle load, you have, or 14, excuse me, you have less than 20% are emerged. And yeah, they kind of catch up on emergence wise. But you're talking these wheel tracks in here, and if they're at a diagonal, you have some corn that are emerging and some that aren't emerging until maybe 4, 5, 6 days later. So will that put the corn behind? Now we're looking at the height at the same study here, and you can see that days after planting, the one where you don't have much compaction and the lighter loads out there, this is the height of it. That was kind of what we'd like to compare it to. And the other two that do have heavier loads, they are shorter and they never catch up. You can see them all through the year. And then we have corn population versus tire pressure. So this is, and we'll talk about why tire pressure and axle load are so important and how we can control those things. But the gray, what this is looking over is 4 years, and it's looking at the corn population counts, and it's looking at where they had no compaction versus flotation tires that were inflated to 36 psi, and road tire inflation of 100 psi. Now, what you'll see here is that in 2 of the 4 years, there was a difference in the population. Some years, there's no difference hardly at all. But other years, and I would say this is when your fields are a little bit wetter, you're going to see a big difference in how many corn plants are going to emerge, and your population counts can go down. When we're talking soybeans, it's not a big deal. If you have less of your soybean population, it's fine, depending how much it does. But when you're talking about wheel traffic, it's only certain parts of the field. But then some years it can be real detrimental. You can also get nutrient deficiencies, and this is because your plant gets nutrients either by mass flow, diffusion, or interception. So let's talk about that. Mass flow is, when your plant is transpiring, and this year is the first year I heard them say it was corn sweat. It's like, okay, when your plant is transpiring and it's evaporating off of the leaves or transpiring off of the leaves, it's also pulling water in from the roots. So you get this flow up to the top of the plant. And when it's pulling this water into the plant, it's taking nutrients with it. And the main ones are the ones that are mobile, nitrogen and sulfur. So if you have compacted soil, it is very hard. Like, okay, this one here on the left, you can see it's going to be very hard for water to move through this soil where it has very few pores, right? They're all small pores. So the plant really has to struggle to pull that water in. So not only are you going to get nutrient deficiencies, but also water deficiency. When you're looking at the right one here, this is a well-structured soil. And you can see that there's a lot of pore space. There's big pores, small pores. And so with the mass flow, it can move in many different paths to that root. And when you're looking at compaction and root growth, this is something that we did, I don't know, about 10 years ago at a field school in the Twin Cities. And Seth Nave, we're doing this with soybean roots. And he has this really great, it looks like a printer or a copier, and you put the root on top of it, and it will measure all the little points and how many miles of roots and feet there are of roots. And it does, it's actually quite amazing. And this one's a demonstration. This wasn't research, but when you have compaction, it reduces the number of roots that are out there, the total root length, so how much it can explore, and the rate of root growth. So where we had heavy compaction, medium, and none, the surface area you can see is more than double where you didn't have compaction. And same with length, it was almost double the length of the roots out there. Now between medium and heavy compaction, I forgot what we used for those. I think he went over it a couple of times, and one he went over just once. You can see that compaction can really bring down how much our roots are growing, which means how much water and nutrients that we can absorb. Now, diffusion only works on like 1/10 of, it's so tiny. And it's also root interception after diffusion. So the root either has to physically touch that nutrient or be very darn close to get that nutrient to pull into the root. And the picture on the right is showing root growth, and this is the top 6 inches. So this is 3 inches down, 6 inches, 9, and 12. And it's showing how, when you plant a corn plant here, how the roots explore the soil. And in the orange circle is where we put most of our nutrients, right? In the top 6 inches of the field. You broadcast incorporate. And here on the left side is a corn plant and how the roots cannot make it through the wheel track. Well, that's where all your nutrients are sitting. Unless you're band applying your nutrients right underneath the corn plant, if you have compaction, it can't always explore that area, depending on how intense that compaction is, and also if we have rains, then maybe the roots can get through it. It would soften it up. So now you're missing your immobile nutrients too, and like potassium, phosphorus, zinc, and iron. And you'll see a lot of phosphorus and, well, more potassium, sulfur, and nitrogen issues when you have compaction out in the field. All of this can lead up to about 60% yield decrease. The problem with it, and that's in the wheel tracks, right? Because we don't usually have a plow pan out there. There's been a few fields I've seen it in, but most of the time it's wheel traffic. Wheel traffic is definitely our number one issue out in the fields when it comes to compaction. And in the Midwest, we're usually looking at 15 to 30%, but this is almost every year. This is not just, and it can build on it. It's not just a one and done and your compaction's corrected and you don't have to worry about it. Because if it was that easy to get rid of, we wouldn't have compaction out there. So how long does compaction last? These almost every picture I use is either from North Dakota or from Minnesota. And so your sprayers are really tough because they have very narrow, tall, high PSI tires, and they don't have much flotation ability. So how long does compaction last? Well, it depends on how long or how deep you have this compaction. So what this graph is showing you across the bottom is how many years you're going to have that compaction, 5, 10 years. And then up on the vertical axis, you have 100% yield, and then how it decreases due to compaction. So if you're looking at topsoil compaction, just in the top few inches, maybe top 6, and it is an intense, it can really affect your yield, but in about 5 years, it can play out. Plus, you also have tillage options and things like that, where as you get deeper into the soil, you do not get these options. So this is more like maybe 6 to 10 inches. And it's showing that you can decrease yield from about 97% down to 92%, and it can last up to 10 years. And then subsoil compaction, anything deeper than 12 inches, it doesn't affect yield as much, but it lasts a really long time. One, the freeze thaw doesn't get down there. The wetting and drying is hit and miss, and you don't have the equipment to go in there and till it back up. So now what? Well, let's look at the causes of this. These are the top 5. Soil moisture. That is the biggest one. Axle loads, the ground pressure, either of your tracks or your tires. How many times you go across that field, and also soil structure, soil health. They all mix together. I know sometimes you might be tired of hearing about soil health and how great it is, because it is. But soil structure it really is key, and we'll talk about why. So this is North Dakota. This was when they actually had to harvest in the spring because they got too much snow really early in the fall. And so this is when the frost is just coming out and they still have a floor that they can get out there. Yeah, that was a wicked bad year. And so when the soil is too wet, that's the worst thing you can do, because especially with clay, they are flat BBs and they kind of just slide on top of each other and they can really cement down. But sands too can also compact. Your greatest compaction happens at field capacity. Well, what is field capacity? Field capacity is about 3 days after a good rain when you can get back out into the field. That is the worst time to compact your field. And it's kind of Mother Nature's cruel joke, I guess. So we can't always plan on moisture. The whole field isn't 100% fit when we go out there with the combines and planters. And that's just the nature of the game. But there are some things that you can manage that are under your control to manage, and that is your heavy axle loads. Please don't use a grain extender on your combine. This determines the depth of the compaction. So how much weight you have on top really forces that compaction down deeper and deeper. So here's one of the studies, and there's a few studies out there, but this is just one to kind of give you a hint. As you're going from 4-ton an axle load up to 16-ton an axle load, you can see that the depth of the compaction went deeper and deeper. So at 4-ton an axle load, you're at 12 inches, and at 16, you're at 2 feet. So, and our equipment is getting heavier than that. The picture is of sidewall compaction. So here you can see that the planter left, especially in clays, you got to be careful of this. And then here you have the plant that's only growing, horizontally. It's not doing the nice umbrella look. So what is our equipment looking like nowadays? Well, our gravity wagons, which we don't use very much, were 6 to 10 ton an axle load out there, depending on the size. The other thing about them is that they have 2 axles versus our grain carts, which most of them only have 1. Then with the Terragator, the real axle out there, rear axle, is 12 to 18 ton an axle load. People go, oh, it's floating. They're floaters. And no, they're not good floaters. So you want to stay around. If you till a lot, using the disc ripping or the chisel plowing every year or moldboard plowing, and then you use the field cultivator and you use more than one pass and things like that, then you're looking at only being around 5-ton an axle load before you start really affecting the soil. And if you have good soil structure, you're on reduced tillage or no-till, and maybe have a perennial in there, then you can go closer to 10-ton an axle load. Being at 5-ton an axle load, you have to be a small farmer with small equipment to reach that goal. So our grain carts are 1,200 bushels, which were the more popular ones. I took off the 740 bushel ones because they just keep getting bigger and bigger. We're talking 35 to 40 ton an axle load. This is at 90% capacity. And again, 1 axle. If you put 2 axles on these, it would cut that in half to 17 to 20. At least you're getting a lot closer to 10, right? The grain cart at 2,000 bushels, tandem or tracked, it doesn't matter. You are putting down almost 80 ton an axle load there. And again, we want to stay around 10. And the reason why, and this is my own experience, is that about every 10 ton it can go about 12 inches of compaction. So the heavier you get, the deeper your compaction is. And then we got the 2,500 bushel grain carts out there, and they're 90 ton an axle. I don't even know how deep they can compact. If you have these larger ones, try to keep them on the headlands. Okay, following and unloading on the go should be left to the lighter equipment. When we're looking at our slurry tanks, these guys have, they've done really well, because what they do is they add more axles, and they also add larger tires. And larger tires can get you a lower PSI, and we'll talk about PSI next. So you look here, and just by lowering or putting on more axles, you can see how much they lower that. So I really wish they would do this with the grain carts. A class 9 combine versus a class 11, you're talking 20 ton an axle load to 44 ton an axle load. They're just getting bigger and bigger. Pretty soon you're going to have to be careful if you can drive this on our roads without an engineer getting upset with you. If you look at our tractors, the 4-wheel drives at 200 horsepower going up to 580. The 580 is also a quad track or a 4-track. That's 18 ton an axle load. Now you're looking at a piece of equipment that you're running a few times across the field, and it's almost as heavy as a loaded combine. So be really careful with this bigger equipment. So let's go to ground pressure. We're looking at all of them. They all make tracks across the field. Also with weight, with the combine, that is loading up with weight, and then you unload, and then it's back down, then loading. So it's not making consistent compaction across the field. Same with some of these with fertilizer or planters where, you have to refill seed. fertilizer sprayer. Now, what you want to do to get your biggest bang for your buck is to pick a tire that has a larger sidewall. Bigger the sidewall, the lower the tire pressure can go. And you want to be around 10 psi. So to keep it simple, let's say 10-ton an axle load, 10 psi for your tires. This was a study done by Ohio State, and they had compared, it's the same tractor pulling the same load, excuse me, and it's looking, well, it's a John Deere tractor for the tires and a Cat tractor for the tracks. And they're looking at tires on the John Deere that were properly inflated at 6 and 24 psi front and back, and then, or sorry, 6 psi for the whole tractor. That was a proper pressure, or 24 psi, which was overinflated. And then they looked at a 2-foot carriage with a 2-foot track on it and a 2-foot carriage with a 3-foot track on it. And what they find here is along the horizontal ones, you're looking at depth into the soil down to 20 inches. And the ones that's vertical here, it is the decrease in pore space. So as this gets higher, you lose pores. And again, you're losing the oxygen in your soil and the ability of nutrients to move and water to move through your soil. So when the tires were overinflated at 24, you can see here that they lost 85% of their porosity in the top 4 to 8 inches. And it diminished as you go down into the soil, which makes sense. Now look at the properly inflated ones. It's this brownish orange one down below. You can see it lost about 50% of its pore space because these are still heavy pieces of equipment. But 50% is a lot better than 85%. And when you look at the tracks in between, the larger track lost about 60% of its pore space, and you're getting about 75% on the 2-foot track. Okay, it has a higher PSI. But tracks aren't necessarily better than tires. If you have a properly inflated tire that's around 10 psi, they will perform the same on compaction as a track will. Now, the same tire overinflated, if you're not going to change the PSI of your tires, go to tracks. So when you look at tracks, when you take the weight of the tractor and divide it out by the length and the width of the track, and usually it's around 4 psi, which is awesome, right? Way below 10 psi. But the thing about tracks is that they have pressure points in them. So the guide wheels have pressure. I mean, look at your track. See how it is wearing on the top? And if you see areas where the lugs are wearing more than the side lugs or vice versa, that means you have pressure points. And also the guide wheels on there are pressure points. So, you know, a lot of things are dependent on this. People go, well, there's different kinds of tracks out there. And there are. The best one's the quad track or the 4-track because you have 2 separate axles. Some of the companies like to say, well, here, let me show you a picture here on the track one. Oh, this is 5 axles. And it's like, no, it's not 5 axles. It does not act like 5 axles. You need them separate. So when you're looking at the shape more like this is the pressure points down below, what it's putting off into the soil. And here you can see each one of them puts pressure into the soil. And, you know, each tire puts pressure into the soil. So don't think just because it's at 4 to 7 psi, it also puts down weight kind of like 15 to 20 psi. And this is something that, one more thing, is the compaction energy is something they're looking more and more at. So when you have something that's pulling, you know, and it's tilting back, you're going to have a different pressure as well. If it's just gliding atop, so things that are self-propelled versus things that you are pulling will also kind of put different pressure into the soil. So what you want to do is properly inflate all your tires, right? Like I said, the bigger the sidewall, the lower the tire pressure. The problem is when you go to drive on the road, it may say your proper pressure should be at 30 psi. And it's because heat is the number one enemy to tires. And as you're going down the road faster, it heats up. And so you need the air in there, or else things warp and a tire can fall off. So you don't want that. But in the field, since you're going, I don't know, it depends what you're doing out there, but 4 to 10 miles an hour. Well, now you're talking that you can lower them sometimes to 15 psi. And that's the same with your semis too, and planters. So when you're looking at this, who's going to lower their PSI of their tractors and planters every field they go in and out of, right? So there's an automated tire inflation system, and there's quite a few out there. You know, there's Precision Inflation, there's AgriBrink, there's Tire Boss, and they all have good experience in this. And what you do is you put it on your tractor, and it can inflate and deflate your tires, and it can do triples on your tractor and the 4 on your planter all in one shot. And it can be really, really fast. It can do it in 30 to 90 seconds, inflate or deflate. The thing is you'll need a compressor somewhere that, a large compressor. The smaller the compressor, the longer it's going to take to pump up. But you can do this whole setup on one. And what's nice about it is if you trade out this tractor, you can take it off and put it on the next tractor. You'll just have a hole about this big in the rim of the tractor tire. Okay. The advantage to this is that when you lower the pressure, you get a bigger footprint. So this is one a field day that we had where we overinflated and properly inflated the same tire, and this is the footprint that it left. It helps with better trafficability. It helps with the wear and tear on your tires. It also helps with the efficiency of the tractor, and it's actually a pretty good return on investment. I usually do not promote certain equipment, but this one actually has a lot of promise. And we've done some research with it, and one of the farmers said, it let me make another pass in the field before I got stuck. So I don't know how much that's worth to you. So when you're looking at properly inflated tires, it changes the fuel use. So here's properly inflated at 13 and 11, 13 in front, 11 in the back, and you're using 1.43 gallons an acre. If you overinflate, it's using more fuel. How many acres can you work in an hour? Again, more acres. You can also go a little bit faster, and you have a less wheel slip. Okay, so having them properly inflated really increases the performance of your tractors. Now, these are unchecked traffic patterns or not controlling your traffic. As you can see here, I love this picture. I'm not quite sure why they turned around so often. Usually I see that with silage, but this one is really well balanced. It's really nice. Well, nice for me, not nice for you. But every path that you make across the field, you are putting down almost 80% of the compaction. That's what happens on the first pass. So you want to use these paths over and over again. That's the concept to control traffic. So this is a picture that Jim Bergma from Pioneer, he's retired now, did. The field behind was rotated and with soybeans, and this one is not. It's just continuous corn. And so you have corn rootworm that is thriving, but corn rootworm can't go through a compacted soil very well. So did not infect the plants and hurt the root system of the ones that were in the compaction. So you can see here where the wheel traffic is, or the headlands, they couldn't establish on the plant, so the plant wasn't weakened. And when they had this big windstorm, the others blew down. And so I guess you can say compaction is good for the field. Please don't. So, but this shows how much of the field you're actually affecting when you're going at angles and you're going straight across and you have that headlands. It is up to, depending on your established or your management, you can be compacting up to 80% of the field in 1 year and making 80% of the compaction on each of those. Now, when you have a combine and it's loaded, it's going to put down more intense compaction deeper. compared to just maybe going out there and doing a field cultivation. Here's another thing that I went on a sabbatical last fall and a half ago, and went to quite a few different universities. And one of the things they were showing is that the planter maps, if you have applied down pressure on your maps, you may be able to map your compaction out there, because it registers how hard it is to push the seed into the ground, right? So you can start getting these maps of where you may have wheel traffic. And this one is showing where they put on manure, and that the manure would go out there, or I'm sorry, this is actually unloading on the go on some of it, and where they're making circles and they're coming back. So when you're unloading on the go alongside the combine. The combine is making a lot of compaction. So if you can use the old compaction or old combine tracks, that's where you want to put your grain cart. There are additions out there, like, oh, well, the extender can't get all the way to the grain cart. You can do these, they're like canvas flaps that go down to the side of the grain cart. And then when the combine, you're up against the combine, it can raise up, and then the grain will hit that it extends the grain cart basically. So it's kind of cool. So maybe look at your pressure maps and see if you can tease this out. Now there's a lack of soil structure. This is something you can do something about. It can take a little bit more time to see the results of it, unlike axle load and PSI. So this is a fairly compacted soil. This is a soil that has been moldboard plowed quite a few different times. So what's the importance of structure? Well, these little aggregates in here, they're your number one defense against soil compaction. What it is they help hold up the weight of equipment. Okay? They're strong. They make your soil stronger. Is structure important? Yeah, you betcha. So what happens is, if you're tilling down to 11 inches, say with a disc gripper, I will guarantee that your ruts will be at least 11 inches. Okay. When we do soil pits, I never make the soil pit bigger or longer than the tractor, because the next spring, when we fill all the soil back in and it's the spring and it's wet, it's like oatmeal. They just, I don't want them to lose their tractor. If you notice here, there's tracks over here, and tires are both stuck in this mess. And you can also see that it's about 11, 12 inches deep too. Okay, so I'm pretty sure they're a disc gripper, and they have a lot of clay in this soil. Also, let me show you this. Okay, what's also great about this is you get a lot of pore spaces, and large ones and small ones. So they took a CT scan of a soil, and here they're showing the macropores. This is what pore space looks like in the soil. You have these little small ones over here. You have these continuous ones. And they're only about 1% of the soil is macropores. And macropores, a lot of times, are either made by leftover roots or by earthworms. Okay. But that 1% of the soil contributes to pulling down 70% of the water. Okay. So when it rains, those macropores mean everything. And when you do tillage, you break them apart. Okay. And tillage, like I said, just the more tillage you do, you go from this over into this. And you can see that you're only going to have small pores. You're not going to have continuous pores. And it's very tough for water to get in there, air for your roots to grow. So how do we minimize this damage? Well, reduce or no-till. The reason why is because you just break apart less of that structure. Now, you can start by just using less aggressive implements, and I'll talk a little bit about the chisel plow. Make less passes across the field. There's a lot of people that traditionally would like to just do 2 passes of chisel plow in the fall and 2 passes of spring field cultivation. Well, why not do 1 pass less? Try it out. I'm not telling you to go no-till or go strip till. Just use your own equipment and try to make it less aggressive. Less passes. Shallow up the equipment. Does your disc gripper need to go at 11, 12 inches? Should it be more at 8? Let's say you're at 10. Go to 8. Go to 6. Just try it out. Also, choose shanks and points over discs. and over moldboard plow. Moldboard plow is kind of the worst case scenario. Sorry. Um, Now, when we look at this, this is one thing I had to learn too, is these Proctor curves. I'm like, oh, what are they? They just look like a lot of science. What it's showing, this one is actually kind of cool though, bulk density. So as it increases, it can mean more compaction, okay? And this is at the bottom is how much water is in that soil. So as the soil gets wetter, it's going to compact more. But at some point when it's getting saturated, you're not compacting, you're not doing anything to bulk density, you're doing other bad things like deforming and squishing, and those are ruts is what's happening down more at the higher water content. So what this is showing, no-till has more aggregates, right? It's a stronger soil compared to reduced tillage, which is in orange in the middle, and then moldboard plowing, which is very destructive to the soil structure. And you can see that when your volumetric water content, so how much water is in the soil, when you're at almost 20%, moldboard plow is that is the best time you are compacting that soil. And at all stages of water, it is higher than if you reduce your tillage or go to no-till. Okay. So does that, hopefully that makes sense, is that your soil is stronger, even if it's wetter, the less tillage you do. If you have a chisel plow and you're like, well, I want to try something, but I really can't afford to buy any new equipment right now, which I totally understand. Here we have, if you have something more like this where it's wider and more twisted, that is going to bury more residue, and it's also going to destroy more structure. So just move your points over more towards something that's straighter and thinner, more like a mold knife. And the thing about uh, excuse me, these points is that when they go through the soil goes up and along them and breaks more along its natural planes. And use that to your advantage versus a disc. So here's a twisted shovel versus a sweep. You can see just by changing out the points on it, you are getting more residue. So that's one way to get comfortable with that residue. A disc is more destructive. It tells where to cut, where to shear. And if you look at when they're repairing a road, you'll see a disc on the side. And the reason why is because it breaks everything apart to very fine particles and helps make a good road bed. But that is not what we want in our field, because rain needs to get in, right? I am running a little behind. So strip till, if you want to know more about it, call me. I love strip till. Google it. And what it does is only does a third of the tillage out there. So you're leaving the residue in between and helping to build the soil, and you're still doing tillage where you need it. This is one that's showing after a rain event, double disking versus strip till. The rain had just gone off to the east there, and you can see the ponding because you have less structure in the field. So how do you alleviate us? Oh, I felt so bad for these guys at a field day. They said, well, we just chisel plow in the fall and just field cultivate in the spring. This is your field cultivation plow pan. Okay. And they also had one for chisel plow. If you want to see those pictures, I got those too. So can you naturally alleviate compaction? In dry years, like I talked about before, anytime you see a big crack in your soil, that is alleviating compaction. Okay, this is the Fargo clays. This is actually in Fargo, and it was over a 4-foot crack. So it's doing deep tillage for you, but you can't tell it where to do it, right? It's just Mother Nature. You just got to trust it's working. So what about cover crops? Well, they improve trafficability. They do. They help you get into the field a lot faster. They build soil aggregates. So tillage takes away, but cover crops or any living plant builds structure. With time, they can break through plow pans, but if they're only this big, probably not. And they protect the soil. So there was a study done by ARS over in Brookings, South Dakota, and they looked at trafficability. So, how long that soil could withstand a stress before it went boop, and this is the machine that they used. They looked at no-till, no cover crops, and when they pushed on the soil, they measured the PSI of that push, and it failed around 90 PSI, and conventional tillage was even lower than that. But if you look at their cover crops, the cover crops helped kind of like build rebar in the soil, so it took more pressure. before that soil collapse. So it helps. It can either do it because it's drying out the soil a little bit, so it's not as easy to compact. And it's also because it's building soil structure, and those aggregates, improve the structure or the strength of the soil. I'm going to pass on this one because of time, but it took time. Basically, this is what this is saying. It took time for the cover crops to work. So anytime you have drown out spots or areas that didn't get planted well, go in there and try cover crops. Okay. Mechanical remediation. What this is you need to know where that compacted layer is. Like I said, it is in different spots within the field. So this is actually something that would be better if you just did it in the low-lying areas, because those are the areas that will be most compacted. But find out how deep it is. Okay, you can go to UW Penetrometer, and there's one there from Francisco, and he talks about how to work the soil probe, and so that you can make sense of the numbers you're seeing. Use the most non-invasive shank, because if you use something that either is parabolic or has a twist to it, it's going to bring the soil up, and then you're going to bring that icky subsoil to the surface. So if you see tan sitting on top, you don't want that. And you want to use the straight shank. It is going to take a lot of horsepower to pull these things. So the deeper you go, the more horsepower you're going to need. So let's say you have this tillage layer here, which again, I don't see much, but I took a picture of the one I did see. And you set the shank just a little bit below it. Okay, you'll pop through it. Do it on 30-inch rows or 22s if you're in 22-inch rows, and pop through it. Just do it once. Okay, then you want to work the soil when it's dry. This was done in El Rosa when it was wet, and what a mess we made. Precision tillage is good because it takes a lot of fuel to pull these things. It can take 30 to 50 horsepower per shank to pull this. That's why you don't see them over maybe 6 shanks. And then you can't drive on it again because you did tillage down to that depth, and now you broke up the aggregates in that area, right? But you pop through the compaction. And I would definitely do this if you think you have compaction before going to no-till, because there's no other way to remedy it once you're in no-till. So again, you want the straight shanks versus the curved. They did a study in Iowa. They did it in quite a few fields. It was either subsoil or not. And what they found is, a little over 2 bushels, sometimes, some years, a half a bushel. Is that worth the fuel and everything that you did there? The main thing is, if you don't have compaction, this isn't going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Okay. So the producer said most of the time there wasn't enough payback. And the other thing is they had to pick a lot of rocks. And it took a lot of time to go do this. So the summary is, it saves fuel. It saves wear and tear on the tractor if you can manage your compaction and start alleviating it. It gives you more consistent yields and much better water infiltration, and more nutrients are available to your crop. So wet soils have less strength. Heavy loads move the compaction down into the soil. PSI, or the ground pressure, is the intensity of that compaction. And increasing tillage, I'll try to go more reduced till as much as you can to promote building structure or not destroying as much structure. Okay, so I do want to let you know that there is a virtual event that will start in February. It is an event that I'm planning with Iowa State, NDSU, Manitoba Ag, and Ontario Ag, and it's 4 days, 9 to 12, each day in February on Tuesdays, and it's all about compaction. So many, many different speakers. We talk about tracks and tires a lot. And if you want the soil compaction guide, there's one there. I think Diane's also going to put these into the chat if you want to, click on them that way as well. So if you want to get a hold of me, Soil Lorax, and there's my email. Okay, did I do okay on that?
That was great. Thank you very much, Jodi. You ready for some questions?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it seems to me most of the examples that you were providing, you were showing individual tires at a specific axle. as opposed to dual tires. So we have a
Mhm.
question from Kurt here, and he was wondering how important are front dual tires for mechanical front wheel drive tractors?
It does give you more uh, torque and power, but they got to be inflated properly. The one thing I see with people using double or duals and triples is that they don't adjust the PSI of their tires. And that's where they're really missing out on the advantages of duals because you can lower them. Because the proper inflation is going to be based on how much weight it is pulling and how fast it is going. And if you have singles, duals, or triples. So go online and it will do it. There's charts from Michelin and Firestone. All of them have charts to properly inflate. Now, having them up front versus in the rear, if it's front wheel drive, it does help. It definitely. I can't tell you the exact number, but I can get you in touch with tire manufacturers that I trust.
Okay, thank you. Tim asks whether you've seen any difference between vertical till and a disc.
Yes. Vertical till is straight up and down. Even if it's wavy or fluted, it is straight up and down. So when it goes through the soil, it's kicking the soil up and it's cutting through the soil. Okay. A disc, and the problem with a vertical till is since it just pushes it up and back down, or flings it up and down, if you have urea on there, it's also doing that with urea and it's not burying it like you think. So be careful if you are using just vertical till to get in nitrogen. Now, a disc is curved, and so the soil goes more around in there, right? So it does do more burying. It also has a lot more ability to cut into chunks. Every piece of equipment has pros and cons. Since it can cut into these chunks, it's also doing that on a micro level with all your structure. So discs are more destructive than coulters or shanks.
So we in the when people were registering, one of the questions that came in was how to alleviate or avoid horizontal compaction layers in the spring. And I know you said you haven't seen a lot of that, but I've come across quite a bit of that in Northwest Minnesota where you'll see a
Mhm.
soybean root growing and then it just grows sideways and
Yeah,
then back down. So,
yeah.
how would you avoid and or alleviate that?
Now, tillage pans, I should rephrase that the tillage, deeper tillage pans are the ones I'm not seeing as much. And the reason why I think is because we went from chisel plow at 6 inches to disc gripping to 8 to 10. So we've taken it out. Now it will be coming back, right? Where I have seen the plow pans is using the spring equipment when it's too wet. You think, well, it's just a field cultivator. Any flat surface, metal surface, can smear that soil. So you got to be very careful with that. And they think, well, I'm just going a few inches. It's okay. Well, no, because I'd rather have you have a plow pan at 8 inches than at 2 or say 3, and you're planting your corn plant at 2 inches. And so now you only have this inch where those little roots then all of a sudden hit compaction. And then they just start going along the side until they find the cracks and they can go down. Um, those roots are not real strong when they're brand new. They don't have the force that the older roots do. So you got to be really careful with your spring tillage. Discs smear the soil. Okay. And they have that area back here as they're going through that is just smearing the soil. Okay. So anything with flat metal can smear, and you got to be very careful.
Okay. One other question. So you mentioned before about how folks might consider their standard tillage to be two chisel plow passes in the fall and two field cultivator passes in the spring. So you said folks should experiment on their own fields and with their own
Mhm.
equipment. What are the typical planter type adjustments? What type of planters do they need to have in order to minimize issues with seed placement, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I would actually say you start even before that with your combine. If your combine is a chopping head, if you're in narrow rows, that's okay. If you're in 30-inch rows, that could really make a mess. It makes a really good mat. Okay, so you want the combine to spread out the chaff for the whole length of the width of the head. If you have these areas in the middle that it's dumping most of it, it is really hard to start, say, no-till beans into that because your planter is just going to have a hard time. So if you're, and I would also start with to minimize your tillage, use it on soybeans because they are just so awesome. They're just the little darlings out there. You roll them, you can, do all sorts of things to them and they still yield just fine. So they're the ones to start with. And I forgot your question because now I just went off on a tangent. Tell me the question again.
Planter, so what
Oh,
you would do regarding planting the next spring after potentially experimenting with reducing
yeah,
tillage?
trash whippers. So make sure everything's spread out evenly. So you're not dealing with a lot of residue in the middle. And also with corn, you can also go in higher and leave most of it in the stalk standing. It has a lot of benefits to it for a different talk, but it also keeps that heaviest residue upright so that things can dry out in between. Then with the planter, you want the residue managers if you can, and I like the finger ones that go through and they can they're the ones that can hit residue best and move it out to the side. And then in the back, most of our reduced till guys, they'll have the rubber and the metal discs, or closers so that it can, yeah, it just does a better deal in the back. And we have information on that if you want to see as well. Also, Iowa State has some really good planter workshops. Shout out to my
Okay,
Iowa
great.
friends. Yeah.
So, in the interest of time and everybody's time here, I propose that we close people out. And then I just wanted to thank everybody again for
Oops,
attending
sorry.
this inaugural session for the Strategic Farming Let's Talk Crops program. Again, thank you to our sponsors. We have Minnesota Soybean and Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Councils that have provided funding for this session. And thank you to our speaker, Jodi DeJong-Hughes. And next week's session, if you've registered for one of these sessions, you've registered for them all. Next week's session is all about edge of field technology for managing soil nitrate losses. And just as an additional plug, if you have interest in this topic that Jodi presented here today, next week there is the Soil Management Summit, which is happening in Fargo on January 14th and 15th. I believe folks could still register if they wanted to. Is that correct? So
Yep.
just search SMS or Soil Management Summit and you should be able to register that way.
With dirt,
Okay. Or
because
dirt.
well, with dirt, because we're with North Dakota this year, NDSU, and that's a great treat.
Oh, it is. And folks, if you don't live and work in Western Minnesota, you probably don't realize what a great partner we have in NDSU Extension.
Mm.
And so we're very glad to partner with them this year. So thank you all for attending.